President Trump is traveling to Dallas later today. We will be covering that later. The president expected to talk about police reform and race relations ahead of a dinner fundraiser. The Trump administration reportedly weighing options, including an executive order to address police abuse in the aftermath of George Floyd's death. South Carolina Republican Senator Tim Scott is pushing back on critics, saying that he is being used by the GOP to draft its police reform bill. Republicans are trying to counter Democratic proposals launched in the House earlier this week. And joining me right now to talk about all of that is founding partner of Northern Starr Strategist, Democratic strategist, and the host of the Starr Report podcast, Michael Starr Hopkins, is here, and Republican strategist, trial attorney Jonathan Madison. Great to see everybody this morning. Thanks so much for joining us. So, Jonathan, first, your reaction to what is taking place and how Senator Tim Scott has been chosen to lead this effort to come up with reform ideas.
Yeah, as Mitch McConnell said, Tim Scott, is, as an African-American, understands some of the challenges that are out there, particularly with regard to police reforms that are actually needed. And Senator Scott has said on numerous times he's actually had encounters with police that were actually very aggressive. He understands from a personal level on how to actually deal with some of these issues. I'm very, very interested and intrigued to hear how he actually approaches these issues. I think it's going to take a collective effort from the Senate and the House, but particularly Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans need to stop this political bickering, stop towing the line, and come together to do something important.
Michael, what's most important here?
I think the first step is making sure that we end qualified immunity. But I think one thing that's not being talked about enough is we need to restore the Voting Rights Act, because if you can't vote, then you don't have your full citizenship. And so I think one of the things that we're going to see pick up steam is, especially in the wake of what happened in Georgia a couple days ago, is a push to make sure that we're protecting people's right to vote.
Yeah, I mean, how has the administration handled this so far, in your view, Michael?
I think the administration has been tone deaf in the last week and a half, 10 days. We saw the president come out at the beginning of the George Floyd incident and talk about what a tragedy it was. And then the tone shifted. The more we saw protesters in the street, the louder the crowds got, the more reticent the administration got, and the more threats we saw in terms of dominate them or the incident we saw in Lafayette Park. So I think that the administration needs to talk to African-American leaders and needs to talk to law enforcement and bring the collective country together so that we can solve this, because it's not going away.
Yeah, and Jonathan, it was a response to what took place on the ground, which was not just peaceful protesters, but looters and rioters trying to flare things up.
Absolutely. I think what we can't miss here is the movement is something we need, right? The looting is something we don't, right? So very important to keep perspective here. We need this movement. It's an amazing a time in our nation to move the dial forward. We need important police reforms, which are happening as a result of this movement. We need to ban chokeholds. We need to ban aggressive use, abuse of power by police officers tasked with protecting us. What we don't need, Maria, we don't need to defund police departments. That's where I draw the line. And to that extent, I'd hope that we can come together and agree on that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, what are you going to do? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the idea that we're going to defund police, I think, has been bad messaging on the part of some of the activists, because that's not actually what they mean. What they mean is we need to reallocate funds so you don't have cities with police budgets that are 50 plus 60% of their budget. What we need to do is take a lot of those funds and reinvest them in education, in healthcare, in social work, rather than having a bloated police budget where we have militarized local police that don't fit the actual need for what that city is dealing with. In those terms, I do agree with defunding the police.
But will they have the resources to continue to make sure that the rule of law is followed? If you get broken into, who are you going to call?
Absolutely. Look, I had a home invasion when I was in college, and I called the police because that's who you call. But police shouldn't be responding to homelessness. Police shouldn't be responding to people having mental breakdowns. That's not what their function is.
What do you guys think about Mitt Romney's thoughts on the November election? The Utah Republican and pretty often critic of the president predicted that President Trump will win re-election this fall. He predicted that the GOP will retain control of the Senate. The lawmaker spoke to reporters after a Republican Senate luncheon yesterday and said all of this. Your reaction, Jonathan?
So I'm inclined to agree with Mitt Romney here. He has no incentive to make up numbers here in his head. He has a terrible relationship with the president, as we all know. And I'm inclined to agree that the presidential election is going to mirror the Senate election. So to the extent that Trump wins and succeeds, you're also going to see the same wave in the Republicans, Senate Republicans.
Yeah.
I do just have to respond to something that Michael just said.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure, go ahead.
Who are you going to call? Michael, who are you going to call if someone who is a victim of domestic violence, a young lady perhaps, calls the police and the dispatcher says, "Hey, I'm sorry, we actually don't have anyone on staff right now due to budget cuts, but don't worry, we've actually allocated funds to your local education and health agencies. Stand by, everything's going to be okay." You can't say that. We need we don't need to defund police departments. We don't need to make those cuts. And if there's any reinvestment in those funds, perhaps it should be to allocate it to police mental health and awareness, training programs. But I think it's illogical to say
certainly we need
defund the
resources
police.
there. Yeah.
Right. Sorry, Maria.
Michael, final word here. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'll just say that Republicans never have any problem talking about defunding health care, defunding social programs to help poor people. And so when we talk about defunding police,
well,
those
I don't know if that's true.
I
don't know if that's true. I know it's talking about defunding health care.
Defunding Obamacare is something that's a very
the Republican plan is smaller government, not so that it's not the government-controlled health care. Not defunding healthcare, but so that it's the private sector healthcare. But go ahead, Michael.
Defunding things like Planned Parenthood is a often talking point of Republicans, and so we understand how.
We're not talking about that, Michael.
But what we don't understand is how to take a holistic approach and actually solve programs. The big issue right now is the over-politicization of these issues. We know how to solve them. Now we've just got to come together and figure out how we're going to do it together.
Yes, we do. All right, Michael, Starr, Hopkins, Jonathan Madison, thank you so much, gentlemen. Great conversation.